In January 1823, a Scottish carpenter named James Hastie stood on the deck of a ship with his wife, his 3 children, and everything he owned. He had sold his house, cashed out his savings, bought land deeds, currency, and a guidebook for his new home, a thriving paradise on the coast of Central America called Poyais. After 2 months at sea, the coastline finally appeared on the horizon, and what he found there would kill nearly 2/3 of the people on that ship. Because Poyais didn't exist. A single man had invented an entire country, complete with a currency, a constitution, a capital city, a bank, and a king, and sold it to hundreds of real people. This is the story of Gregor MacGregor, and it is, without question, the greatest financial scam in human history. Gregor MacGregor was born in Scotland in 1786. Not royalty, not wealthy, just ambitious, dangerously so. At 16, he joined the British Army, and almost immediately he discovered something about himself. He was an extraordinary liar. Not the clumsy kind, the surgical kind. The kind that makes people trust you completely before they ever think to verify anything. His first major move was pure calculation. He married Maria Bowater, the daughter of a Navy admiral, which gave him instant access to Britain's most elite social circles. With her family's wealth, he paid £900 to skip years of military seniority and buy his way to captain. Then Maria died, and MacGregor, suddenly without his social ladder, sailed to South America. What he found there changed everything. It was the early 1800s. Venezuela, Colombia, Peru. New countries were forming everywhere as Spain's colonial grip loosened. Nobody in Europe could keep track of who controlled what. Maps were wrong, names changed, new nations appeared overnight. MacGregor recognized the opportunity immediately. He fought alongside Simon Bolivar in Venezuela's war for independence. Genuinely, this part was real, and earned the rank of general. He was brave enough in battle, charming enough in meetings, and when the war wound down, he had a military title, a reputation, and a very, very big idea. He sailed back to Britain in 1820 as a decorated war hero, and he arrived with a story nobody could disprove. MacGregor walked into London high society and introduced himself as Gregor I, Cazique of Poyais. Cazique meant prince, and Poyais, he explained, was a thriving young nation on the Mosquito Coast of Central America. Fertile land, a democratic government, a booming port city called St. Joseph, complete with a cathedral, a bank, and an opera house. The British aristocracy welcomed him with open arms. He was given use of a country estate. He was introduced at court. He wore custom military uniforms embroidered with the insignia of the Order of the Green Cross, a fictional honor he invented himself. But here's where MacGregor's genius truly showed. He didn't just talk about Poyais, he built it. He commissioned a 355-page guidebook, complete with illustrations, geography, climate data, and detailed descriptions of St. Joseph's streets and buildings. He invented a coat of arms, a flag, a legal system, and a tricameral legislature. He printed 70,000 notes of Poyaisian currency, officially signed by order of His Highness. He opened an office in London that sold land deeds, 2 shillings and 3pence per acre, about 1 day's wage. Workers could afford it. That was the point. He hired people to sing songs about Poyais in the streets. He distributed leaflets. He placed advertisements. And then, most audaciously of all, he went to a London bank and secured a government loan of £200,000 for the nation of Poyais. That's approximately $30 million in today's money, backed by all the revenues of the government of Poyais, a government that did not exist. The timing was perfect. Legitimate Latin American bonds were actively trading in London. New nations issued debt all the time. Nobody found it strange that a country called Poyais needed financing, because nobody could verify it didn't exist. Information traveled by ship. Maps were incomplete. The chaos of South America's independence era made a new country entirely plausible. People invested their life savings. They bought land. They exchanged their British pounds for Poyasian dollars, worthless paper, because they were going to need local currency when they arrived. And then they boarded ships. The Honduras packet departed Britain in September 1822 with 70 settlers aboard. MacGregor personally stood on the dock to wave them off. He shook hands. He smiled. He was the picture of confidence. 3 months later, the Kennersley Castle followed with 180 more. James Hastie was on this ship with his wife and 3 children. He had sold everything. When the Kennersley Castle arrived at the Mosquito Coast in January 1823, they found the first ship's passengers on the beach, starving, sick, living in makeshift shelters. There was no St. Joseph, no cathedral, no bank, no opera house, no port, no roads, no farms. There was jungle, mosquitoes, and the beginning of a hurricane season. The settlers tried to build shelter. They had no tools suited for it. They had no food beyond what they'd brought. They had Poyasian dollars, worthless in a country that didn't exist. Malaria swept through the camp. Then, yellow fever. People died within days of arriving. Children died first. By the time a rescue ship from the British colony in Belize finally reached them, fewer than a third of the original settlers were alive. James Hastie made it back to Britain. His wife survived. 2 of his 3 children did not. And here is the most extraordinary part of this entire story. When Hastie and the other survivors returned to London, gaunt and barely alive, when reporters described them as looking ghastly and cadaverous, many of them refused to blame Gregor MacGregor. His charm had been so total, so complete, that even victims couldn't bring themselves to believe he had done it on purpose. Some signed affidavits at the London government defending him. They blamed the agents. They blamed the organizers. They blamed bad luck. MacGregor, meanwhile, was throwing parties in London. As the survivors' ships began arriving, MacGregor did the one thing he was always good at. He ran. He fled to France in 1823, before he could be charged with anything in Britain. Because in Britain, they never charged him at all. He was never prosecuted for Poyais, not once. In France, he did the same thing again. Same scam, same fictional country, same land deeds and currency and government bonds. This time, French authorities noticed something strange. Thousands of visa applications were flooding in for a country called Poyais that appeared on no French map. They seized MacGregor's ship before it could depart. He was arrested and spent 8 months in jail awaiting trial. Then, at trial, his charm worked one final time. Through a 5,000-word statement and expert legal defense, he shifted the blame entirely onto a French colleague. He was acquitted on all charges. Released in 1826, he returned to London, tried selling Poyasian land again, moved on when it didn't work, attempted smaller versions of the scam throughout the 1830s. And then, in 1838, Gregor MacGregor sailed back to Venezuela. His military rank of general was restored. He was granted a pension and back pay. He was made a full citizen. He died in Caracas in 1845 at the age of 58. He was buried with full military honors. The man who invented a country, sold it to hundreds of people, caused the deaths of roughly 180 of them, stole the modern equivalent of tens of millions of dollars, died peacefully, celebrated, never imprisoned for a single day for the thing that made him infamous. So what actually made the Poyais scam work? It wasn't that the victims were foolish. Historians are clear on this. These were ordinary, rational people responding to information that appeared completely credible. MacGregor understood something that most people don't. Trust isn't built on facts, it's built on signals. His uniform, his title, his aristocratic connections, his guidebook, his office, his bank loan. Each one was a signal, and each signal made the next one easier to believe. He didn't ask people to believe in something impossible. He asked them to believe in something they simply hadn't verified yet. And in a world before phones, before internet, before instant communication, verification was hard. By the time anyone could check, the ship had already sailed. 200 years later, the mechanics are identical. The frauds that work today, fake investment platforms, Ponzi schemes, crypto scams, all rely on the same playbook MacGregor wrote in 1820. Build the signals, get in front of the right people, create urgency, and leave before the ship comes back. The only difference now is that the ships return a lot faster. Subscribe for a new financial crime story every week.